Aloha and good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, March 21st, 2024, and it is 9:03 a.m. Will the Planning and the Economy Committee please come to order? I would like to welcome committee members who are present in the council chamber, Committee Vice Chair Cordero, council members Okimoto, Say, and Wire. I would also like to welcome the following members participating remotely by video conference, Councilmember Tupola. Councilmember Tupola, in accordance with Hawaii Revised Statute, Section 92, 3.7, please identify each person with you at your location.
Hi, good morning. I'm here alone. Thank you.
To all our council members participating remotely, please notify me if you intend to leave the hearing or disconnect your video beforehand, even if you only intend to leave for a quick break. Pursuant to Hawaii Revised Statute Section 92-3.7, this meeting will be conducted as a remote meeting by interactive conference technology with the following procedures in effect for the meeting. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony in person in the council chamber or remotely on all items on the agenda when each item is taken up. All persons who registered to testify in person will be called upon first, followed by those who registered to testify remotely. Persons who have not registered will be given an opportunity to testify following the registered testifiers. For those standing by remotely, please utilize the Zoom raise hand feature to indicate your desire to speak. For those joining us by telephone only, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. Before testifying, each person shall state their full name and will be limited to a 1-minute presentation on each item. HRS Section 92-3.7 requires all votes at a remote meeting to be conducted by roll call unless unanimous. Therefore, I will first call for objections, and if there are any, I will call for a roll call vote. For those council members participating remotely under HRS Section 92-3.7, the meeting will automatically recess if we lose audiovisual contact with you and cannot reconvene until we reestablish contact. Therefore, please announce beforehand if you will be voluntarily signing out of the meeting. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and phone number, will be available to the public as described on the posted agenda. As a courtesy, please turn off all cell phones for the duration of the meeting. Moving to agenda item number 1 for action, Resolution 24-65. This resolution expresses the council's strong concerns relating to House Bill 1630 HD1 and Senate Bill 3202 SD2, currently moving at the state legislature, relating to urban development density on residentially zoned lots and county zoning authorities. Both of these measures have crossed from their respective chambers to the other. If passed, the measures would impose a mandate for counties to allow at least 2 additional dwelling units on residentially zoned lots and appears to require the Director of Planning and Permitting to approve subdivision requests for zoning lots as small as 2,000 square feet, which is much smaller than the current minimum lot sizes in the city's residential zoning districts, which range between 3,500 to 20,000 square feet. Today's hearing on Resolution 24-65 is meant to facilitate a robust discussion so that council members, the public, and state decision makers better understand how these state measures would impact our neighborhoods, communities, and city and county of Honolulu operations. Members, please note that we posted a proposed CD1 amendment introduced by Chair Waters on an addendum, and a summary of the amendments was also posted. Members, please also note that I have a hand-carried CD1. Members, please note Councilmember Cordero has proposed a hand-carried CD1 identified as OCS 2024-0269-319, 2024, 2:30 p.m. I will now defer to Vice Chair Cordero for an explanation of her hand-carried CD1.
Thank you very much. Basically, this amendment changes the concerns to state opposition should the discussion go that way. I do want to note that this is a route to take if we find that discussion leads that way. And I want to thank the committee just for the consideration, but especially just to talk about the implications. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Members, please also note that I also have a hand-carried proposed CD1 that would add additional whereas clauses, amend and clarify existing whereas clauses, and amend the be it resolved clauses to include, among other things, specifics about the impacts of these state measures on the city's existing land use and zoning laws, how many dwelling units are currently allowed in residential zoning districts under the existing land use ordinance, and under Bill 64, 2023, proposed CD1, which would allow both an ADU and an Ohana unit in residential zoning districts, and that in addition to the numerous policies adopted in the last 3 years to support and incentivize development of affordable housing, the amendments to the LUO and Bill 64, 2023, proposed CD1, could substantially increase production of affordable housing by allowing multi-unit dwellings on underutilized lands in certain business zoning districts. The proposed amendments also raise concerns about the state bills with respect to the potential costs to the city and private landowners to support the increased mandated density, lack of clarity on how many additional dwelling units would be allowed on each zoning lot, potential increased property tax valuations and housing costs due to increased development potential, and costly legal challenges and additional mandates on an already strained Department of Planning and Permitting. Specifically, my proposed hand-carry CD1 amendments are as follows. It amends the second whereas clause to replace the bills are intended to increase with the intention of the state bills appears to be. It amends the sixth whereas clause to read as follows. Whereas while the state bills may be appropriate for the neighbor island counties where zoning lots tend to be larger than those in Honolulu, they are not appropriate in the city, where there are a number of residential zoning districts denominated as R20, R10, R7.5, R5, and R3.5 zoning districts, with minimum lot sizes in each district being respectively 20,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet, 7,500 square feet, 5,000 square feet, and 3,500 square feet, and a majority of recently developed zoning lots being either 3.5 or 5 zoning lots, R5 zoning lots, and where the existing density of developments cause unique infrastructure and neighborhood challenges. It amends the seventh whereas clause to read as follows. Whereas requiring the counties to approve subdivision applications for zoning lots as small as 2,000 square feet in size, as proposed in the state bills, would render all of the city's residential zoning districts moot and could lead to a complex patchwork of different size zoning lots within close proximity to each other. It amends the eighth whereas clause to add even more to paragraph 3. It amends the ninth whereas clause to remove the parenthetical phrase relating to nonconformities. It deletes the contents of the 10th whereas clause and replaces it with language that describes the city's updates to the LUO via Bill 64, 2023. And the 11th whereas clause, it adds reference to traffic congestions as one of the negative effects of monster homes. It moves the 13th whereas clause to the 16th whereas clause. It moves elements of the 14th whereas clause to the 6th whereas clause relating to the neighbor island counties and deletes the 15th whereas clause. It adds new 17th to 21st whereas clauses. In the 22nd whereas clause, it combines the contents of the 16th whereas clause with new language concerning impacts on public outreach regarding the development plan for the primary urban center, and it amends the final whereas clause to include reference to policies the council has adopted and is in the process of adopting. It amends the be it resolved clause to add, including, among other things, the substantial impact on the city's existing zoning districts and corresponding development standards for structures therein, and the character and nature of neighborhoods and communities throughout the city. It amends the be it further resolved clause to read as follows. Be it further resolved that the council agrees with the purported intent of the state bills and supports some of the policy ideas considered in the state bills as reflected in policies recently adopted by and being actively considered by the City Council to support the production of affordable housing, but the council finds it prudent to consider these policies within the framework of the city's general plan, development plans, and sustainable community plans, and with input from the housing and planning experts, and with ample opportunity for engagement and input by the residents and businesses of the city, and makes miscellaneous technical and non-substantive amendments. Members, I would like to take public testimony before we continue. We will now proceed with in-person testimony in the council chamber. Clerks, do we have any in-person testifiers for this item?
Chair, yes, we do.
When I call your name, please come forward to the testifier podium and begin by stating your name for the record. First, I will call upon Representative Lisa Martin, State House District 51. You need to turn the light on.
Start again. Good morning, Chair and City Council members. My name is Lisa Martin, and I represent Waimanalo and Kailua. And I appreciate the efforts that you have made on behalf of my constituents who really do not like the monster homes in their neighborhoods to fight those. And I now appreciate your efforts to possibly stop the state legislature from making all monster homes legal. The bills would force Honolulu to approve applications for subdivisions of up to a minimum of 2,000 square feet. It also forces Honolulu to approve 3 dwellings per lot with no special restrictions on size of the additional lots or on occupancy. As you know, right now we can have 5 unrelated adults and their families in a home. So that means that each 2,000 square foot dwelling could have 3 homes, all, stuck together with common walls, and up to 15 unrelated adults and their families, which feels a lot more like a barrack or a dorm than a home. Increased unplanned density in our suburban neighborhoods will lead to insufficient street parking, and even with the 3,500 square foot lots, I know there are a lot of conflicts between neighbors at this time. This is in our neighborhoods. This is not around transit zones. This is not in our urban centers where people might have a lifestyle without cars. In addition, what we've seen in our community is that with vacation rentals, people that are planning to have a business in those lots bid up prices, and those increased prices put homeownership out of the reach of my constituents. This bill similarly will be very attractive to developers to go in and buy lots knowing that they can subdivide them and build multiple units. And that again may increase rental units, but it will put home ownership, which is the dream of most of my constituents, out of their reach. I can tell you that this has been sold at the legislature by the introducers to my colleagues, saying that all the counties are in support. So I really appreciate today that you folks are giving us the opportunity to see if Honolulu County is indeed in support, which I would highly doubt. So I really appreciate you taking this up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I wanted to welcome Chair Waters. Members, any question? Representative Martin, just to clarify for those who are watching and for the council members, I know that SMA districts are exempted, but with regard to your district, and Kailua and Waimanalo, can you tell us the areas in those areas that will be impacted by these bills?
Basically, there are some exemptions. And it is interesting that some of my exempted colleagues are in favor of this bill, which will not impact their district, but will only impact others. But in my district, basically, the areas along the beach are special management zones so that they are not impacted. But everybody else, the neighborhoods of Enchanted Lake, Kealu Hills, where we do have monster homes being built right now when it is not legal, also in Waimanalo, all the neighborhoods. So I really appreciate your, the discussion you'll have today. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to come over today. We're going to move on to the second testifier, Trevor Nagamine.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Trevor Nagamine. I'm here as an individual and as a resident of Mililani. I would like to stand on my written testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Members, any questions? Are you for or against a resolution?
Opposition to the resolution.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The third testifier is Ted Cavalis, Grassroots Institute of Hawaii.
Aloha, Chair Kiaina, Vice Chair Cordera, members of the committee, Ted Cavalis with Grassroots Institute. To say we're disappointed in this resolution is an understatement. HB 1630 and SB 3202 are a long-awaited opportunity to combat some of our high home prices, the highest in the nation, as you all well know. I say long-awaited because the Honolulu Primary Urban Center Development Plan from 20 years ago identified the need to allow more small lots. It hasn't been updated since then. That's 20 years of inaction by this body. And now you want more time. That's not how it works. Our home prices are continuing to go up. Our crisis has just gotten worse. To say these bills would legalize monster homes is just false. These are about legalizing small homes on small lots. Part of the reason we're dealing with monster homes today is because of that continued inaction by this body. Monster homes push the legal limits of large single lots. Small homes on small lots are quite literally the opposite of monster homes. The county keeps control of setbacks and height restrictions, so the ball is still in your court. And I'll just end by saying, with Honolulu asking for an exemption, it means you're accepting the status quo. I refuse to do that for my friends, for my family, and for my neighbors that continue to be priced out of paradise. I don't want to be next. Mahalo.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Chair Waters.
Thank you. Good morning, Ted. Hey, I appreciate your passion, and I consider you a well-read and intelligent person. So let me ask you these questions about, let's just take Senate Bill 3202. So on page 5 of the bill, right, it quotes HRS 46-4, which I have before me, but I'll read from the actual bill. It says that zoning in all counties shall be accomplished within the framework of a long-range, comprehensive general plan prepared or being prepared to guide the overall future development of the county, right? So that's the general plan. This is required. The city is required to do this, which, by the way, Senator Elefante worked on and introduced resolution, I think it was 21-23, signed into law by Mayor Blangiardi on January 14th, 2022, outlining where future growth should be, right? So the law, as written and in this bill, requires us to do this. And as you know, the general primary urban core plan has just been passed by the Planning Commission, is now coming to us. And I get your frustration, I really do, because on this side of the bar, many of us are frustrated as well. But we're complying with the law. The law requires us to do this. So what happens is, and by the way, on the bottom of the page 5 of the bill, the zoning power granted herein shall be exercised by ordinance. So my question to you, though, then is, when the bill actually says that the counties shall allow subdivision of 2,000 square feet and shall allow 3 units on what otherwise was 1, how does that jive with 46-4?
I mean, Chair Waters, I appreciate that, and I don't have those references directly in front of me. But again, understanding that this has been talked about for a long time, and yet we have not passed anything out of the council to address small lots or address subdivision. When we have lots that are R10, let's say, or R7.5, that's a lot of land that can be used for more housing. Rather than putting one large home on that large lot, why don't we look to subdivide that lot potentially and allow more people to build homes? This is something, in my mind, will allow us to preserve our conservation and our environmental lands, because we would be building up on land that we already have housing on. So in order to address the housing shortage, we have one of two options, right? You can either build out or you can build up. And so a lot of people don't want to build out, and that's understandable. That's what makes this state so great. But then we have to really take seriously building up. And so the state laws aren't mandating subdivision. It's not mandating that folks have to put 3 units on their lot. It's just allowing that and giving people the option to do what they want to do on their property. But I can take a look at those items that you referenced and get back to you on that.
You know, and I understand exactly what you're saying. And by the way, the city does allow ADUs on your property, and perhaps we could look at adjusting that a bit. And I think the planning committee is even looking at allowing 2 ADUs on an existing unit, but within boundaries. But my question really is a legal one. How does Senate Bill 3202, not requiring it, but allowing, right, a developer to do this, how does that comport with existing zoning laws? And thank you for looking at that, that question, because that's really, as a lawyer, I asked that question. And what you're saying is it doesn't mandate owner to put 3 units on their lot, but it allows an owner to do that. So by allowing an owner to do that, what we're seeing in my neighborhood is a developer will knock down a house and then put an entirely new house on there with more units. So that's one of the things we're worried about, that for example, you take a 10,000 square foot lot. You can now divide it into 5 lots, correct? Under this law, under this bill, is that correct?
Correct.
And then you would be allowed to put 3 units on each of those 2,000 square foot lots, right? You're nodding, but just so everybody
Yes,
can
yeah.
hear. So that would now create, instead of 1 house there would be 15 units there, right? And basically you're saying, and by the way, we just have to call a spade a spade. If that's what you're advocating for, let's say it. You're okay with putting 15 units on a 10,000 square foot lot, right?
These would be smaller units
Right.
first. And I want to just clarify, Chair, the council is still in control, like I mentioned, in terms of setbacks and height requirements. So, you know, somebody's not going to come in and put a 5-6 story apartment complex plus in a residential neighborhood if that is not allowed by the county currently. So, you know, we're not allowing a pop-up of Kakako, let's say, and these tall apartment complexes in our neighborhoods. These are things that would allow an increase in our housing supply without changing the neighborhoods too much. Our neighborhoods are going to have to change. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Demographics shift, things change. People move, people die. I mean, all of these things happen. And so our neighborhoods have to remain flexible to address this. And again, if we don't do this, people are going to continue to move, people are going to continue to leave, and we're going to be left with this continued conversation that we've had for the past 20 years.
No, all good points. But again, I just want to emphasize that what this bill would allow, as an example, 15 units on a 10,000 square foot lot, 15 unrelated families possibly on one 10,000 square foot lot, correct?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so
Well, let's just do the math. You take a 10,000, you divide it into 5. That's 5 2,000 square foot lots, right? You put 3 units on each one of those 2,000. 3 times 5, 15. I mean, if I'm reading this wrong, please tell me. And how do we make sure that that doesn't happen if you're saying that's not what you're advocating for? Are you advocating for that or not?
Well, I mean, I think it's the feasibility, first off. I don't know that it's really feasible to build those small lot homes on that small of a lot. But it would also allow for things like duplexes and triplexes.
Correct.
On those lots. And
Correct.
just to your point of the council looking at allowing an additional ADU, that would allow for the primary dwelling unit and 2 ADUs on a lot, which is what we're talking about. It's 3 units on a lot.
You know, that'd be great if that's what people would do. But as you see in Kaimuki and all over the island, by the way, where you get developers knocking down perfectly good houses and then putting multiple units on there. And that would be allowed. In worst case scenario, of course, I'm just saying worst case scenario, but it's happening already. So again, I'm just want to be clear that if you read the bill the same way that I do, that would be allowed. What I just talked about, 15 units. And I'm not even talking about a 20,000 square foot lot. We could do the math on that, but no sense. I think you get my point. But please, if you could do two things for me. One, research what I've talked about. How does the 46-6 and Chapter 205 really comport with what this bill does? And then are you really advocating for allowing the subdivision and allowing 15 units on a 10,000 square foot lot as an example? But thanks, Ted. Again, I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate where you're coming from and admire your passion as well.
No, thank you, Council Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Shea, did you have a question for the testifier?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. First and foremost, thank you, Ted, for being here. I truly believe that the council in the past 20 years has done a lot in regards to providing housing. The issue for me today is simply put, Ted, that what you're saying, instead of going vertical, we are now going horizontal, a subdivision. The question is this. In most cases, you'll probably see not a family that's going to retain the property, but a developer who's going to offer the highest amount of cash for the homeowner to sell. From that point on, then it follows this particular proposed law that the state is trying to address. My point is that if the state really wanted to create more housing, go back to the Land Use Commission and reclassify agricultural lands. We have the worst right now as far as the land use classifications. It's so limited in the area of urban classification. It's so large because agriculture was thrown in as a panacea to our addressing the issue of conservation and rural, urban, and finally ag. My point today is this. If we want more, I'm open to it. But don't dump it in District 5 at this point in time. Council District 5. You've heard me. I've supported the state's bill in regards to Hawaii Revised Statutes 201H. You only give me 45 days to approve a project that is basically vertical. Let's talk about, you guys want to go horizontal? State, reclassify the lands. Not put more pressure in District 5, Council District 5. It is really a problem. The calls that we get, the emails, the neighborhood boards, and for me, as a council member for District 5, I've been trying to be fair to both sides, the developer, the private landowner, a family who owns a property, that if you want to go up on 201H, be my guest, we'll give you the exemptions on the FAR. We'll give you the exemptions on the height limit to a degree. All I'm saying, Ted, this is going to just compound the problem for District 5. I thought the proposal that one of the members of the city, not the city, the state had at one of their hearings was that, why not exempt Oahu? If the other three counties are in strong support, give them the opportunity. They have the land. Here on Oahu, we are trying to keep the country country. We are trying to preserve Central Oahu. We are trying to preserve the windward side. We are already up to here and to our necks in regards that we're not providing services to the west side. You call a spade a spade. I've been making a request now for almost 3 years, asking the state administration to come up with a model or a plan that it's, as we increase density in Council District 5, we should get more of the services too. The more people we have, the more incidents are going to occur. And that's where I would say to my colleagues, we don't need a measure like this. But if they want to pass it, so be it. All I'm going to do is point the finger. All I'm going to do is point the finger. And if they're going to mandate it upon the city, give us some resources for infrastructure. That's the biggest cost that we have, the UHERO report. Infrastructure, regulatory barriers, you name it, Ted. I don't have the answers, but I'm happy that I'm sharing my manao to the general public out there. Thank you, Madam
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Say. Councilmember Wire, did you have a question? Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the next testifier, Matt Popovich.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Popovich. I live in Kaneohe with my wife and our one-year-old son. And about a year and a half ago, me and my co-lead, Damian Waikoloa, started Hawaii Yimby, yes, in my backyard, because we are, unsatisfied with the amount of affordable housing that families like mine can afford in Oahu. I just want to call your attention, first of all, to this poll that Holomuo Collective ran just a few weeks ago, I believe, where they actually asked about if people would support, smaller, less expensive single-family homes that can be built with 2 to 4 homes on a typical lot without needing more land, often resulting in homes being built faster at lower cost. We highlighted in our testimony that, in fact, let me get to it real fast, 87% of Honolulu residents said they would support this. 87%. So this resolution, it goes against what 87% of people here want, right? We had a lot of testifiers, in the written testimony who opposed it, and I feel like it's a very imbalanced perspective, Before my baby was born, when I, moved out of me and my wife's tiny little apartment in town to Kaneohe, we wanted to find a slightly bigger place because we were really cramped, we didn't want to raise a baby in a tiny little apartment. And the only place we could find, was really, really kind of old construction. It was built in like the 70s or the 80s. And we only got by sheer accident. The real estate agent actually put the wrong phone number on the listing. And so we managed to figure out the right one by looking at their website and stuff, but nobody had called it, I guess. We were like one of the first, right? And it spoke to like how little housing there was available that met our needs in our budget, right? And even then, like the building was so old that we couldn't adequately cool it. My baby, after he was born, he had these red dots all over his face, all over his torso.
Matt, you're going to have to wrap up your testimony.
Okay. It was heat rash. We had to buy an AC unit because we couldn't adequately cool the place because it just leaked. It leaked air, right? So, Chair, Councilmember Waters, when you say people are tearing down old houses to build new ones, that's why people are moving out to Las Vegas, because there's new construction there, right? It's not 50-year-old buildings, 50-year-old houses, And so it's not really only just about the shortage of supply. It's also about, like, our housing stock is aging. We need new construction, right? Yeah. Sorry for taking too much time. That's all I want to say.
Thank you so much. The next testifier is Vanessa. Well, first of all, did anyone have any questions? If not, we're going to move to the next testifier, Vanessa DiStaggio.
Aloha, council members. My name is Vanessa DiStaggio. I live within District 5, Councilmember Say's district. I live on a dead-end street off of a dead-end street. And I've already sent in written testimony to explain like the aging infrastructure in my area and environmental concerns. But why I'm here today to testify in person is I'm so incensed with the propaganda, the narrative that's being put forth about these bills. The bills are written in a way to make it seem like it works for local families. We already live multi-generationally. Over the past 9 years with ADUs, people could build ADUs, but according to DPP, there's only 1,091 of them, when there could be like 100,000 of them. I have a problem with the lack of affordability clauses. There's nothing in the bill that makes it affordable. No listing of AMA, rent control, price caps, so a developer could just come in, like Councilmember or Chair Waters was saying, someone could come in and make on a 5,000 square foot property, 6 separate units, sell them all for $1 million or more. This is not affordable housing for local people. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Is there anyone else in the council chamber who would like to testify on this item? Please come forward to the testifier podium and begin by stating your name.
Aloha, Elizabeth Riley, Livable Hawaii, Kaihui. First, I want to say to the Grassroots Institute, I'm a supporter, but I do want to ask that next time you come before the general plan, the sustainable and development plans, and present your ideas that way. So this issue right now, we are in full support and stand on our testimony, but the problem here is the process. It is terribly wrong to go ahead and allow the legislature to go ahead and dictate this. I could only hope that you continue to stand strong and give a voice to the people of Oahu and protect the quality of our lives. It is vastly important to uphold the general plan and the respective sustainable and development plans. Hundreds of thousands of dollars and people's time have been put into this. It would make a mockery and a farce of that, let alone speak to the issues that Councilman Say has spoken to about the lack of infrastructure. And to the issue of development or the developers coming in, there is absolutely no way, if you were to say that it's owner-occupant with this initiative, that it would work. Please continue to deliver on what you have promised. I'd like to see the continuation of that at the mayor's office and here at City Council. I'd like the Department of Planning and Permitting to catch their breath and continue to improve. This is a curveball that's being thrown at us and will greatly impact the livability of our communities. Thank you very much. Please continue to stand strong and give us a good voice.
Thank you so much. Members, any questions? Again, I'm going to call for anyone else in the chamber who would like to testify. Please come up to the podium and begin by stating your name.
Hello, Madam Chair. My name is Trey Gordner. I live in a townhome in Eva Beach, not far from Laulani Tides, a charming and popular neighborhood on 1,400 square foot lots. I'm also trained as an urban planner and lead the Hawaii Zoning Atlas, which studies the link between zoning regulations, housing supply, and affordability. I'm speaking in that capacity today in opposition to Resolution 2465 because smaller homes on smaller lots are more affordable by design and will keep more local families in Hawaii. In a 201H hearing last year, Chair Waters asked attendees, how do we build more housing that locals can afford? I was there, and I took that as a serious call to action. I studied the various costs of home building in Hawaii, and I studied what other jurisdictions across the country were doing to make housing more affordable. I found that according to the city's real property tax records, a vacant R10 lot costs $1.4 million, 10 times the AMI for a family of 4. I found that dating back to the origins of zoning, minimum lot sizes have been imposed not as good planning practice, but as a tool to exclude lower income households from desirable areas. And finally, I found that across the country, the way other states and cities are building more housing that their residents can afford is by reducing minimum lot sizes and increasing the number of units that can be built on a lot, consistent with HB 1630, SB 3202, and the recommendations of the American Planning Association. So for that reason, I urge you to oppose this measure because smaller homes, smaller lots are more affordable by design and will keep more local families in Hawaii. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, any questions?
Yes.
Chair Waters.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today, and I appreciate your research, and I'd love to read more of what you found. But just let me give you a couple examples of what's happened in Kaimuki. On 928 17th Avenue, there's a 7,500 square foot lot. It was bought for $1.2 million. They knocked it down and built 2 homes there. One sold in May 2020 for $1.375 million, and the other sold for both of them sold for $1.37 million. On 920 19th Avenue, a 15,000 square foot lot was bought for $2.5 million. It was knocked down and divided into 4 homes. One sold for $1.5 million. Well, actually, all 3 of them sold for $1.54 million, and the 4th one was kept by the developer. I could go on, but I want what you're proposing to work. What safeguards can we put in the bill amending 32-2 or the House bill that would require them to be affordable? Because we're showing based on what's happening in my neighborhood, these houses are not affordable, right? $1.5 million might be argued that's the missing middle, but I don't buy that. That's not the missing middle. That's I mean, honestly, I don't know who's buying these homes. But for $1.5 million, right? So can you help me figure out how we can amend 3202 to make it so that they are building affordables? I know what other people are saying, hey, the more we build, the more we do it, the more houses we build, the prices will come down. Do you find that in your research that that's what's going to happen?
So I find that it helps. I think one of the important points about the controversy around monster homes is we spend a lot of time focused on the supply side, noticing that these builders are building these homes, and not very much talking about the demand side, which is the reality that renting a room in one of these homes is often a last desperate attempt to stay in this state. Chair, I'm not an expert in these particular lots, and it's unfortunately not in my power to amend the state bills in any way. But I will say is, you're hearing from homeowners in this testimony, but the question the committee should be considering is not what these owners think, but who the next owners will be, to your point. They won't be anyone local. Locals can't afford R20, R10, or even R7.5 lots, as you noted, at today's prices. And so as long as we retain our existing minimum lot sizes and unit caps, they never will again. So you may make the case that shrinking these lot sizes or adding 2 homes to a 7.5 lot is not affordable enough. That doesn't seem to me to be grounds to reject these bills altogether. My concern is that at this point, our single-family neighborhoods are in effect earmarked for future out-of-state buyers.
And I'm concerned about that as well. You made a good point. It's not within your power to amend the state bill, but it's not in our power either, right? But one of the things I'm hoping happening today is that we can figure out how to make that bill better and how to make it actually legal. You heard my argument or question of Ted Kafalas about how does it comport with what's already on the books. To me, those are my concerns, but your input is really, really appreciated. And I think we're all fighting for the same thing. We just want to figure out how to do it the right way. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Again, is there anyone else? I'll call again for anyone else in the chamber who would like to testify. Please come up to the podium and begin by stating your name.
Hi, my name is Christine Arozan. I'm a Kamiki resident. I hope you give me a little more time, but both sides are passionate because everybody wants the same goal for affordable housing, but we just have different approaches. Both sides are passionate, and
Christine, I'm not going to give you that much more time. If other members want to query you, then you will have more of an opportunity to respond. So if you, just like an extra 30 seconds, okay?
But people are mischaracterizing those of us who are opposing the bills as NIMBYs, name-calling, shaming us for coming forward and speaking because they think we only complain about the issue and have not provided solutions for affordable housing. Everything I've done since 2017 has been about affordable housing. I've worked closely with the council from back then to try to alleviate the issue. So I find it kind of infuriating that people are saying that all we're doing is complaining and not trying to come up with solutions. That's all I wanted to say about that. But to Vanessa's point, what's misleading is people are saying that we can't already add ADUs to our properties here. There are over 106,000.
Christine,
yes.
Because you took your whole opportunity talking about something else, can you just, I'm going to start asking questions if you don't mind.
Yes.
Because I think you have a lot to say. So let me just ask you first and be clear. What is your position on this resolution?
I support this resolution, and I oppose
explain
the
why.
state bills because I've studied the monster home issue since 2017, and allowing more density attracts developers and investors, no doubt, and it only produces unaffordable housing. Without parameters in place to control that, like, I don't know what. That's the million-dollar question as far as trying to control that in our county. But Honolulu already allows for building ADUs. We have 106,000 residential units that are properties that can qualify for ADUs, but we've only produced 1,000 units. Allowing people to do more is not going to encourage the same people to build. That's not the stuck.
Thank you. I see other members have questions, but just to make clear, you believe that under current law, with allowing the ADUs, if it was a more efficient process to increase those numbers, it will help address some of the concerns.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I'm just curious in having that conversation. Like, for example, I don't think we would be allowed to have any like owner occupancy requirements, but like you said, I think my concern is divesting, families of property and developers turning these into units that we're not intending. And then we go back like pre-mid-KIF almost. So just curious, like, do you think owner occupancy is something to be looking at, or?
I mean, the developers, the Monster House developers and other developers and investors that have bought the properties, like in my neighborhood, some of them are owner occupants and they'll hold on to it for whatever time they need to and then sell it off, So some of the examples that Chair Waters shared is exactly what they did. So they split it up into 4 units, kept one, and the intention is to sell it eventually, probably after 2 years.
Is it problematic once they leave, or are there other problems that are arising, like when they're living there, that give you concern and pause?
I mean, they increased what's troubling is I'm for upzoning where it makes sense, but when you're packing it into our older neighborhoods, like my neighborhood, no sidewalks, no stormwater drains, and we're never gonna get that probably, not with a lot of cost to the homeowners. So that's not gonna happen, but you start to increase density 3-4 times, which this bill proposes to do at a minimum. Like we need breathing space. I mean, like our R5, R3.5 districts are already densified.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cordero, Vice Chair Cordero.
Thank you. Hi, Christine. First off, not to oppose your point, but I'm not against density. I'm not against development and developers. I'm very much for it. I have a very dense district from Aiea to Kapalama, and that's going to become even denser, right? Especially height-wise. The biggest thing that is in between that faces my district from Aiea to Honolulu, and especially in Kapalama, is when the homes and the new units, the new dwelling units on the lots do get built. Oftentimes, people want to take advantage of that, and they approach those people building it or asking if they can seek a unit there. A lot of the time, they see that it's left empty, or people are filtered it out maybe in less than 30 days or so. And so, I'm struggling with that, and I was wondering, I don't really know much about the organization, but I was wondering if you folks have faced that, how you would recommend a neighborhood like mine to address that, because, I do have density. I'm for density, but I just don't know how I could even secure units for the neighbors or local families that are seeing these units being built and want to live there, but aren't allowed the opportunity because they're using it for, I don't know, I'm not sure what else. But have you seen that around the island? And how do you think we should address it?
In Kaimaki and Kololo and Kapahulu, many of the monster homes or investment properties are being used as transient accommodations and such. So I really don't know how to tackle that issue. I was just sharing yesterday with Rep. Evslin that people are, like for me, there's a monster house across the street. There's 5 families in there where there was only one. 12 cars, 20 people. I've never complained to the DPP about it because I feel bad. And that's how local people are. We're not gonna complain. Then around the block, there's a vacation rental with 8 units in it. The neighbors hate it. They don't complain. But that's how you get enforcement, right? Like, you have to complain. But local people just eat it and they don't wanna make waves. So I don't know what the answers are because it comes from the community and complaining, and we don't want to because we feel bad, right?
Right. I mean, so I'm used to like the 12 homes, multiple families, especially in Kalihi. But it's really when these units, multiple dwelling units on these lots that are smaller dwelling units are then not used for local families. And so I think that's my main concern there, and main concern when I was able to obtain new parts of the district, including IAEA, and seeing that pop up even more. So thank you for your input.
Thank you. We're going to now, thank you so much. We're going to now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers for this item?
Chair, yes, we do.
When I call your name or the last 3 digits of your phone number, please follow the prompts to unmute and begin by stating your name. The first testifier we have is Makana Hicks. Is Makana online?
Yes, I am.
Please proceed.
Hey, aloha, everyone. I just wanted to provide comments on the bill. First, I would point out that this bill is not a complete dead loss. There's a lot of good in the bill. Increasing density is just a matter of fiscal and environmental responsibility for the city. So I pulled some example data in my written testimony that shows that the apartments that I live in are units. That's about 18 units on a 0.2 acre lot, and collectively we contribute $14,000 in property taxes. If you look at an equivalent single-size family lot, they're contributing only $7,000. Nonetheless, this is being pitched as an affordable housing bill, and there is no evidence that it will. If you look at where this has taken place, for instance, in Minneapolis, these increased construction is always associated with rising rents. Developers are not stupid. They are in the business of making money. That's not to shame them. That's what they do. So rents up there, real rents are up 8%. If you compare that to neighboring cities and even to San Francisco, that's more. So this is not an affordable housing measure. And to Waters' point, Councilman Waters' point, if we want a good bill and we want to make this effective, we need to find a way to put those guardrails in the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any question for Makana? Thank you so much. For all of the other testifiers, if you could just be conscious of the time frame. You have 1 minute. If I ask you to wrap up, if you could continue on for another 30 seconds if you need more time. The next testifier is Deborah Murrick.
Chair, testifier is not logged on.
Next up, we have Andrew Lawrence.
Chair, testifier is not logged on.
Francois Duval.
Hi, sorry, I'm on by phone. Andrew Lawrence on by phone.
Okay, is this Andrew?
Can you hear me?
Andrew, is that you?
Yes, I'm on.
Okay, please.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Yes, thank you so much for your opportunity to support on this, to testify on this resolution, which I support. I'll just add to my written testimony by telling you what I know so far, at least what I've been able to find out, that the legislators that I've talked to are already set on this thing needs to pass. The neighbor island ones don't want to exclude Oahu because they don't want this kind of density on their own island. There is an assertion that the new development brought on by this proposal will create a trickle-down effect of truly affordable housing. In the past 33 years, I have not seen that happen. I don't know anybody who's seen that happen. What I can tell you I've seen happen is what happened 8 months ago in Kaimuki when I had to move. 2 or 3 foreign investors bought the property, immediately doubled the rents on 14 truly affordable units, trashed all of the groundscaping, all the landscaping that made it nice and livable, looked at opening up a Turo online car rental with any available parking, which would be extra in addition to the rental if you wanted parking, and then talked about to me and others about how they could under the table do short-term rentals because they couldn't make enough money back on what they had gotten from the loan. So I moved out. The last I saw, there were 4 to 6 UH students who could not afford the rent living in a unit that used to house just 2 people at most. And there were 8 immigrants.
Mr. Lawrence, if you could please wrap up your testimony. Mr. Lawrence, could you just please wrap up your testimony, please?
I am done. All I'm saying is that I'm afraid that the bills in the Senate and the House that is written are not going to create affordable housing. It's going to create this investment opportunity, which puts us who are currently in affordable housing out of the market. Thank you.
Thank you
I've
so
seen it. Oh, I can provide dates. I can provide names if you need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? If not, we're going to move on to Francois Duval Arnold. Is this individual clerks? Is the individual?
Yes, I'm
Francois?
here. Hello.
Hey,
Yeah,
aloha, good morning.
Council member.
Please
Good morning.
proceed.
Yes, so for us, our neighborhood has been we had a monster house across the street, and it has been a real disaster for what used to be a really peaceful neighborhood. It was divided into a CPR, which is fine, but now the investor has decided to create 4 apartments that he's actually renting. He's not living in here. Now, I totally understand that ohana is important and they should be able to live within their house. But this is not ohana. This is a foreign investor. And now he's looking at having, with this law, they're trying to do 6 apartments within that unit. You have presently 14 bathrooms, and you have 12 bedroom, what used to be a single house. It's really unbelievable. The traffic, number of cars, you have 9, 10 cars. There's no real parking. So you imagine multiplying this by, I don't know, 20, 30 houses in the neighborhood. I'll leave you with the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? If not, we're going to move on to Debbie Schatz, Bill Hicks, and Bobby Steer in that order. Debbie Schatz.
Chair testifier is not logged on.
Next, we have Bill Hicks, Chair of the Kailua Neighborhood Board. Please proceed.
Aloha, Chair Kiana. I am Bill Hicks, Chairman of the Kailua Neighborhood Board. At our board meeting on March 7th, we adopted as a resolution, the Kailua Neighborhood Board opposes Senate Bill 3202 and House Bill 1630, which require the counties to allow the development of a minimum of 3 housing units per existing residential lot. This resolution, 2465, substantially aligns with our significant concerns about the state bills, and we strongly support passage of Resolution 2465. Mahalo for initiating this extraordinary step to provide needed City Council input to the legislature. The basis for our strong opposition to the state bills includes zoning and land use determinations for residential lots are inherently a local function that should not be mandated from the state level. The state bills would allow greater density than monster houses, which would be grossly out of character with surrounding neighborhoods. DPP's 2021 annual report says the remaining housing unit capacity on Oahu is over 80,000, based upon the quantity of housing projects committed or proposed. There are an additional 10,000 plus illegal short-term vacation rental units on Oahu, which could be used for resident housing. In the last 5 years, Hawaii has already added 27,000 homes to the housing inventory, even as Hawaii's population has dropped by over 16,000 in the last 3 years. These trends suggest such drastic and harmful measures are not appropriate. The state bills mention urban districts.
Mr. Hicks, you're going to have to wrap up, and what we could do is open it up to questions if people have any questions. I'm just trying to be fair for all testifiers. So if you could just wrap up your testimony, please.
Mahalo, final sentence. The state bills mention urban districts, but beware, that actually means any residential neighborhood greater than 1 house per half acre, which is about 22,000 square feet, which is virtually all residential lots in Kailua. Mahalo.
Members, any questions? Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Bobby Steer, followed by Stephanie Sakamoto and Whitney Bozel. So Bobby Steer, is Bobby Steer on?
Chair testifier is not logged on.
Stephanie Sakamoto.
Testifier is not logged on, Chair.
Whitney Bozel.
Hi, thank you, Chair. My name is Whitney Bozel. I'm a member of the Manoa Neighborhood Board, but I'm here as an individual today. I'd like to testify that I strongly support this resolution. I think that zoning exists for a reason. Whether people want to recognize it or not, there are differences in what the, different parts of our island can absorb. Mauka is not Makai, and I understand people's frustration and wanting to increase densification in different areas, and that's what plans like the PUCDP allow for. There are reasons that people spend years studying and in consultation with neighborhoods, with different departments, with different, institutional and civil expertise across these departments and craft plans which designate areas that can absorb that additional capacity. The problem with monster homes is not that it's one structure on a lot. All the problems that people have enumerated would be the same whether it's 3 separate structures on a small lot or one large one. The issue is about when you are putting in density in an area that cannot absorb that due to the infrastructure capacity, simple geography of back of valleys, top of ridges. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter exactly what the specific conditions are. The point is that there are conditions that have to be addressed on a granular level and cannot be fixed through a mandate and a broad brush, sort of allowance for all zones across the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members, if there are no questions, clerks, I need to ask, is there anyone else standing by remotely to testify?
Chair, there are none.
Thank you so much. Members, for the administration, we have for Corporation Counsel, Dwayne Pang and Brad Saito, and for the Department of Permitting and Planning, we have Director Don Apuna and Liz Krieger. Before we go into questions, I did want to ask for the Department of Permitting and Planning, did you want to say anything before we start asking questions?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to say a few things. Obviously, we do support more housing, and as we are in a housing crisis. With regard to this specific bill, HB 1630, the original draft was extremely troublesome as far as the potential for it to allow monster homes, et cetera. But we've been trying to work with the legislature, and through that, in the second draft, we did ask for additional language to ensure that we could continue our authority with the LUO, including monster homes regulations. We asked that there be consideration of infrastructure and other resources. And I believe there's also provision regarding the department's authority and ability to create rules to implement something like this. So in the current draft of the HB, we believe that that authority to enforce the LUO to not allow monster homes is still there. And so that is what we, throughout this legislative process, that we fought for, and we believe that that will help us to not allow monster homes through this bill.
Before I go into questions, you commented about the House bill, but what about the Senate bill? Because I understand that it's the Senate bill that's going to be moving.
So the Senate bill, we did provide the same arguments. I think that needs refining as well, but they did adopt some of the language as far as our authority to continue to enforce the LUO as well as other codes.
Okay, members, we are in discussion, and if you don't mind, I'm going to start off the line of questioning. I just want to say, because I know, like, for example, for my line of questioning, I have 13 subject areas. So if we don't mind, we're going to rotate. So, and I'm just going to start with 2 subject matters. But let me just say that given that there have been many versions of both of these state bills, I wanted to note that my questions are focused specifically on SB 32027 Senate Draft 2, which passed the full Senate and crossed over to the House with a clean effective date. This bill still has time to be heard and passed into law. So first, I will focus on the city planning and comprehensive zoning requirements, and then talk about what geographical areas we're actually talking about. And members, you have on your desk the various maps, and so you can refer to it when we're talking about geographical areas. So first, since I have, actually, let me start off with Core, please. If Core could come up. And let me ask the question, and then you can identify yourself. With regard to the state's requirements for counties to zone according to comprehensive plans and the city's plans that comply with these state requirements, how is the Senate bill consistent with the planning process and plans envisioned by state law?
Good morning, Brad Saito, Deputy Corporation Counsel. I think I'll answer this question this way, and that's just by reference to the way the bill relates to the city's zoning plans and zoning regulations, and also the comprehensive planning process. So there are a couple of issues with the bill. One of them is kind of broad scale because it treats all land within the urban district residential zone the same. So whether or not you're talking about urban district land on the North Shore or within the urban core, it allows for the same development density. Generally, city planning documents consider different locations, the availability of access to infrastructure, things like whether or not there's available sewerage, whether or not there's enough traffic capacity. But by treating all of those areas in different circumstances the same, there is some inconsistency with that long-range planning process. Another issue is also just the distinctions between the different residential zones on Oahu. So we have the R20 to R3.5 zones. According to the text of the LUO, the purpose of these different zones is twofold. One is to provide different standards of living in different areas. And another one is that larger lots, the R20 in particular, and to some extent the R10, are intended to provide a buffer zone between non-residential development and residential development. So there's a transition from non-residential uses to residential uses. Under these bills, all of those residential properties are treated the same, and so it's the same development density throughout those regions. So I guess what I would say is, in terms of consistency with the planning process, the results of the bill tend to undermine our existing zoning scheme and long-range plans.
Thank you. And then members, you can ask supplemental questions when I turn the mic over to you. So thank you for that. Can I ask DPP for some follow-up questions relating to this subject matter? Do you have any thoughts about the requirements of this bill and its consistency with the city's general plan, development plans, and sustainable communities plans?
So I think that if the effect in the originally draft bill, that there would be an effect as far as what could be produced or allowed under the original draft. But again, I think under the current draft, we could still continue our enforcement of the LUO, et cetera. And I don't necessarily think that there would be major differences in what happens and be inconsistent with the general plan and the community plans. It's that face. I mean.
Let me repeat the question.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts about the requirements of this bill? And I'm talking about SB 302 CSD2 and its consistency with the city's general plan, development plans, and sustainable communities plans. That's the question.
So how the bill would affect those plans?
Is it consistent? The question, I think that,
well,
are these bills consistent with the city's general plan? Do you need, does anyone want to supplement your answers there?
Oh, okay, I'll have Dina of our planning division.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Chair and members of the council. My name is Dina Wong. I'm the division chief for DPP's planning division. to your question, if the bill is consistent with the city's general plan and development plans and sustainable community plans, I think what this bill does is it turns the city's planning process basically upside down, and it's driving it from the implementing zoning code side. I think the general plan, as Chair Waters was mentioning, is the overarching policy document for the city. It contains policies and objectives in various subjects, including population, and it directs where population should go. We have a directed population growth policy, which calls for most growth to be in the primary urban center and in the secondary center of Kapolei, in urban fringe areas of Ewa and central Oahu, and it aims to keep rural areas in rural nature, to keep the country in those areas. So from the general plan, right, we have the DPs and the SEPs, which further go into the character of these communities. So it's these plans that get implemented by the zoning, not the other way around.
Thank you so much. And then while we're on that, I wanted to ask about the status of the primary urban core development plan. If this bill passes, how may that affect the process for updating the plan, community input, and the substance of that plan? And for our members, this district is huge. It stretches from Kahala to Pearl City.
Okay, so we had a continued hearing at the Planning Commission yesterday, and they will be transmitting to the council the proposed plan that DPP put forth, and they also added in 3 changes. 2 were from Chair Waters, and 1 was from Neighborhood Board 5 that the DPP supported. How will it affect the process? I don't think it will affect the process. The plan will go to the City Council for adoption by ordinance, so it will continue on that path. Community input is going to be at City Council during all of your hearings, and substance of the plan. That will be up to the discretion of the council if you're going to make any changes to it.
Okay, thank you. Again, members, I'm going to start talking about the maps now. If any of you have questions when I turn the mic over, you can supplement my line of questionings on any of the items I've discussed. So, members, you have maps on your desk. You have 3 maps. So this question could be to both DPP and CORE. First, I want to make sure with regard to the bill, it only applies in the state urban district and expressly excludes shoreline management areas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Members, you should have 3 maps on your desk of Oahu. The first map has all of the state urban districts shaded in red with a line to identify the SMA boundary. The third map just shows only the shoreline management area shaded. So my question is, the bill uses the word residentially zoned lots, and that the bill's mandates would apply in the city's residential districts. Would it also apply in the zoning districts the city calls the country district?
No, it would apply to all districts zoned residential, R2, R5, 3.5, et cetera.
What about our apartment and BMX districts?
No.
Members, the second map on your desk shows in yellow and green the residential and country districts that also fall within the state urban district. Okay, before I ask other questions, I'm actually going to turn it over to other members, and then we're going to take turns. Councilmember Tupola.
Thank you so much, Chair. So, Director, just a few follow-up questions. I did read your testimony submitted for the HB and the SB version of what we're discussing today. And the first one was support for HB, and then the second testimony I read from you was the SB, which was still in support, but you offered some comments. And so I saw that those comments in the SB, I'm not sure if they incorporated all of them word for word, but I guess my question is, I think it's going to be a little tough because in this resolution, we're saying we oppose these bills. But so far from what I've seen in all the testimony, your testimony is the only one from our county, which was pretty much in support of this bill. So I guess to clarify the question, this bill will definitely affect how we do our process in the county, but are you suggesting that it will not affect our ability to implement the Sustainable Communities Plan? So you believe that it will affect it, but that we can still do what we need to do to implement the Sustainable Communities Plan that we've been working kind of more on a local level?
Yes, I believe we're able to continue to enforce our plans. And then just to clarify, so we definitely support more housing, but I think in our testimony we stated that we are unique, we are much more dense, and we didn't want to necessarily prevent the other counties' ability to take advantage of some of the tools that are in the bill, but support the intent. And the draft that we did support on the House side was after it included a lot of the provisions that we had asked for to maintain that authority.
Right, which, you know, indefinitely in conference committee, they might be able to incorporate some of that, or some of it might be incorporated into the SB. So on your amendments, you suggested that it should be, let's see, Chapter 205 should be allowed at least 2 residential units as opposed to the 4 they suggested. And then you also added in language that we should continue to apply any ordinance enact pursuant section 246.4 relating to location, height, bulk. So I think what I'm reading here is you're inserting things that will still give us the autonomy to be able to protect the characteristic of neighborhoods. Is that what you're doing here in your amendments?
Yes, that's correct.
And then real quick on the last one, it says, notwithstanding any other law or rule to the contrary, the director of the county agency responsible for the land use may give final approval for the subdivision consolidation or re-subdivision. So instead of shall, it's may, and you're thinking that by saying may, that it gives us more of the ability to decide if there needs to be approval for subdivision consolidation?
Yes, that we would evaluate and make a determination, and that our determination wouldn't necessarily be yes or approval of that subdivision.
And then in the next one that you suggested, you said that we should do 3,500 square feet in area as opposed to 1,200. And this is for parcels residentially zoned. Could you explain that to me real briefly, how that helps us?
So the 3,500 square foot is consistent with our current, you know, our 3.5, and I think it's more consistent with, I mean, 2,000 or 1,200 is very, very small, and it's very difficult to develop anything based on our development standards.
So you're saying that if it was a little larger, then it would be a little bit more feasible to actually add on something to that size lot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Director. You know, and I guess, Chair, just my last thoughts, and I have to ask to log off because I have a meeting at 10:30, but my last thoughts is just, it is going to be difficult for us because from everything I can read from Director Takeuchi Apuna, it does seem, well, it is portraying the city to be in support of all of this with these amendments. I would also add that Kaina Hall, the DPP director for Kauai, actually submitted some good amendments too. So we would be wise to kind of try to incorporate their amendments and try to fight to get those put in, because again, now that it's so far along, which doesn't mean we can't insert our voices again, we have been only represented by DPP in all the testimony and all the discussion, and she's been in support. So somehow we're going to have to swing that pendulum back and try to figure out where to insert ourselves, because it does seem like now we're opposed, but then in the testimony, all of it said we're in support of it. So those are just my thoughts. Thank you, Chair, and I am going to be logging off now.
Thank you, Councilmember Tupola. The reason we're having this is because we understand that there's not going to be a conference. They're not open to amendments. They intend on moving the Senate bill. And because we felt that the city and county of Honolulu is impacted, we needed to make sure that, number one, we were doing our job, at having a say. And then second, also providing an avenue for those who have been following the process throughout at the legislature and feeling that their voices have not been heard. Thank you so much for participating today. We're going to move on. We're going to move on. But before we move on, because I want to go back to the maps, can I call up Corp Counsel to just clarify with regard to the applicability of what areas? Because we all know residential. Can you clarify the bill's applicability to country district and apartment and BMX districts, if it's the same as what DPP has stated?
Well, based on a facial reading of the bill, I infer an intent that the bill apply to the lands that are currently within our zoning districts that are designated residential. But I don't think it's absolute certainty that the bill will ultimately be construed that way, because residential uses are allowed in other areas. So there is a potential for dispute and some arguments that this bill should be read more expansively. Simply renaming our residential districts single-family home districts would probably not immunize those lands from the effect of the bill. And so there is some uncertainty about whether or not the name of the zoning district alone would be the determinant factor in deciding where it applies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to now move on to Vice Chair Cordero.
Oh, thank you, Chair. This question is for the Director of Department of Planning and Permitting. My first question is, based on the proposed update to the PUC development plan, is the city, is or isn't the city already moving towards increasing density with a mix of housing in the urban residential areas of the PUC, which is from, once again, Pearl City to Kahala?
Yes, that's what I understand, that there, in certain residential areas, that the plan does look at and consider modifying or increasing density and height in those areas. So, and I have Dina here who can provide more details, but that's correct.
Okay, and along with that, are we looking, or in addition to that, are we looking at adding 2 ADUs already within residential lots without these bills moving forward?
Yes, through the LUO update, that's kind of a proposal that DPP has looked at as well.
So if it is already then moving forward, then these bills are either premature, or we have, as we know it, as a county who have, I guess, the ability to oversee zoning, we have home rule, and it's premature to have them tell us or recommend us to do these multiple units on residential lots or urban development lots.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, through the LUO amendment and the PUC update, and then I think there's also consideration of how we can further densify the apartment districts. So all of these things are definitely going on. We're considering in order to provide more housing units.
Okay. Where do we think, and I'm just looking at it because we kept talking about the plans, so I looked into the plans, and of course with the plans we see that, with the areas we plan for our sewer capacity, even our parks are planned for our capacity, right? Where I'm just talking about, because I now have more parts of IAEA, that we included more, have one more park that's slated to be stood up because of the density in IAEA that's growing. And so with that, would that become a problem with the extra or the additional density in the urban development areas if we've already planned for park, sewer capacity, and even school capacity?
So I think you're correct as far as we do need to plan infrastructure in order to enable additional units and density. As the bill, the draft that I see where it requires or it can be denied if there's not sufficient infrastructure, that would not allow further units if that infrastructure is not currently capable of serving those new units.
Okay, thank you. And I guess simply, do you think that the state or the city should be making these zoning laws as it's based off of our plans?
So I think as Chair Waters had mentioned, when you look at Chapter 46, there's language that clearly states that the counties have the ability to plan and use zoning in order to allow for orderly development.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I turn to Chair Waters, I wanted to acknowledge the Cub Scouts Troop 39 from Palama. Can you guys raise your hands over there? Welcome to the Honolulu City Council chamber. Chair Waters.
Thank you so much. Director Apuna? So I'll just start generally and then get into the weeds. But so your department has created the Oahu General Plan, right?
Yes.
And it's through considerable contemplation, public hearings, and cost. Really, this plan costs probably hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's no joke, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And it's to guide growth throughout the entire island of Oahu, right?
Correct.
And the plan also refers to development plans that would also guide growth. As an example, the primary urban center development plan, right?
Correct.
And it lays out, again, through considerable thought, diligence, and cost, how development should look in the primary urban core, right?
Yes.
And the general plan actually says, hey, we should guide growth in the urban core, right?
Yes.
As well as the EVA development plan, right?
Yes.
And the general plan says, hey, we should concentrate on EVA as well as the urban core, right?
Yes.
That's what the plan says, yeah? And by the way, this was adopted by Mayor Blangiardi on January 14th, 2022, yeah?
Yes.
The plan also calls for a sustainable communities plan, like the East Honolulu Sustainable Communities Plan, right?
Yes.
Which again guides growth and planning for this neighborhood because we want our communities to be sustainable, right?
Yes.
And I can tell you all that through this process, which was just adopted recently, right? The East Honolulu Sustainable Communities Plan was adopted, made by the Department of Permanent Planning and adopted by the council and signed by the mayor like last year, right? Well,
yes.
Actually 2022, I should say. Okay, and this guides growth, right? And by the way, each one of your communities members, you have your own sustainable community plans. There's a Central Oahu Sustainable Communities Plan, the Waianae Sustainable Communities Plan, the North Shore Sustainable Communities Plan, the Ko'olauloa Sustainable Communities Plan, the Aiea Pearl City Neighborhood TOD Plan, East Kapolei Neighborhood TOD Plan, and so on and so forth. And by the way, each one of these plans costs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's just talk about East Honolulu as an example. So what this bill would allow, right, is for subdivision of a lot down to 2,000 square feet, right, in residentially zoned areas, correct?
Yes, if it complied with our subdivision rules and ordinance.
If they comply with subdivision rules and ordinance. Let's get to that in a second, because that's a very, very good point, and I want to see how you get to that. But I have a map behind me that shows the residential areas in the island of Oahu, right? That's what Chair Kia Aina was talking about, and I just blew it up so everybody could see. But basically, the urban areas on Oahu are residential areas, right?
Yes.
And it basically touches each and every one of our districts, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Including in my district, East Honolulu, right? So, in the East Honolulu Sustainable Communities Plan, basically, in this plan, which was developed by your office in consultation with my community members. And I can remember meetings, going to meetings in the back of my constituents' home where 15, 20 people talked about what they want in this plan. And basically, it was adopted with those things in mind, and it guided growth. And basically, this plan basically says the only growth that really can occur in East Honolulu is in Hawaii Kai or the shopping center. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I believe so.
So this bill would allow growth in places that weren't contemplated by the East Honolulu Sustainable Community Plan, correct?
If the LUO would permit it to be.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Because as I read the bill, it says that, well, maybe I should ask Cor these questions instead, but can you just explain to me, like, how would the LUO not permit it? Because the bill basically says, you know, the director shall review and act upon these applications.
So to act upon it, again, I think it would be, it could be an approval or a denial. So I don't think we're forced to approve every subdivision application that comes in asking for 2,000 square foot lots.
And just to be clear, what you're saying is subdivision. We're not talking about these larger developments that go on with we call, as we know, a subdivision with multiple homes. It's simply subdividing an existing, say, 10,000 square foot lot.
Right.
Okay. So, and we talked about this the other day, but can you explain that to folks? Like, how do you come to that conclusion?
So subdivision isn't just the considerations when you subdivide land. I think that it needs to also include the circulation, traffic circulation of the lot and other requirements for infrastructure and spacing that would allow the development. So say you take a 10,000 square foot lot and you think you're going to subdivide it into 5 2,000 square foot. If you do that, you need to have the same appropriate circulation, traffic, et cetera, sidewalks. And Mario is here from our subdivision branch who can speak more to those details. But I think when you try to effectuate this on these smaller lots, you won't be able to, under the subdivision rules and requirements, to necessarily receive that request of 2,000.
So you're saying the subdivision rules trump, and forgive me for the use of that word, but it trumps this bill. Because what I'm reading here is that it shall allow for at least 2 additional, well, just as an example, shall allow for at least 2 additional dwelling units, right? But may deny or reject if the permit application, if you determine that there's insufficient infrastructure.
Yes.
Right? But infrastructure is not defined.
It isn't, but it should be, it can be defined through rulemaking according to the bill by the department.
Okay, and I mean, if we just look at infrastructure in its basic form, that's sewer and water, right? But does it include roads, parking, right?
I think it could under the rulemaking if we wanted to. So if they're going to give us that authority to rule make what is determined to be infrastructure, that could be part of it. It could be roads and the parking, et cetera.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Cor a question, Vice Chair, or shall I turn it over to someone else?
Okay, yes, you can ask.
I can, okay. Is Brad there? So Brad, you probably heard my conversation with Ted Kafalas from Grassroots Institute, and I just wanted to follow up with you. So I'm looking at page 5 on the bill, right? It basically is citing Hawaii Revised Statutes 46-4, which basically says zoning in all counties shall be accomplished within the framework of a long-range comprehensive general plan prepared or being prepared to guide the overall future development of the county, right? That's the existing law, right?
I think that's an accurate statement of 46-4.
Okay, and it's in the bill itself, right?
Right, that
as you
the
read the
text of
bill.
that section is included.
Okay. Also on page 5, it says the zoning power granted herein shall, and as an attorney, I pay attention to those words like shall and may. So shall means you have to do it, be exercised by ordinance that may relate to, and then it lists a whole bunch of things, 1 through 12, but it says minimum and maximum lot sizes, right?
That's correct.
So we shall, under current state law, determine minimum lot sizes by ordinance, right?
That is the text
And again,
of
that's in this
46-4.
bill, but yet the bill on page 1, well, actually it's page 10 and 11, it determines minimum lot sizes, 2,000 square feet. So isn't that inconsistent with itself?
There is a inconsistency between those two clauses in that statute.
I mean, anybody can sue for anything, but is this could this create a lawsuit for the city if we denied one of these permits, right? I mean, because the director is saying that, well, we can deny these permits if they don't follow our administrative rules, but yet the law here says you shall do it. So can that create these lawsuits of these developers who are saying, I own this piece of property, I want to subdivide it into 5 lots on my 10,000 square foot lot because Senate Bill 3202, Senate Draft 2 says I could.
So if the bill passes and the city does basically assert the authority to reject the minimum 2,000 square foot lot size, then that issue could come to a head and result in litigation.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it could, like I said, anybody could sue, but this is realistic, right? I mean, we're dealing with lawsuits every day and appeals to the Building Board of Appeals every day. We just went through one, right, for property in my district. Okay, thank you. I'll defer to other members at this time.
Can I go to Councilmember Okimoto?
Thank you, Chair. If I could have Director Takeuchi Apuna. I just had a couple of questions, and one of the questions might actually be related to what Councilmember Tupola may have asked. But before I ask that, if we've talked a lot about monster homes here and the concern that this could lead to that, could you define, when you guys are looking at permits, what is the definition of a monster home?
So there's no, monster home is just a term that is.
We hear it a lot, though.
Yeah, we hear it a lot. So monster home, I think, from what I understand, it's when people don't follow the requirements under the LUO for large dwellings, and so they're exceeding the setbacks, the height envelope, the number of wet bars, bathrooms, et cetera. So that's what is considered when they're going beyond what is allowed under those development standards.
And so this, with your support of I guess it's the Senate bill now, since the House bill is no longer continuing, you're not concerned that could lead to monster homes being created?
So the provision that we wanted in the bill, which I think they've included, is to allow us to continue to enforce the LUO, which includes those development standards that regulate monster homes or prevent monster homes.
Okay. And how would this bill affect, we talked about urban communities, how would this bill affect the urban communities?
So if it were, like I said, the previous draft of the House bill where we didn't have these authorities that we think are in there, then it could create a lot of just density, kind of more of a free-for-all. But again, the restrictions that we've asked for, or the ability for us to enforce our regulations, I think would not allow that explosion of a lot of units.
I think even when I'm hearing the other questions, I think the vagueness of your testimony and others is a little concerning. And I'm not an attorney, but the word shall actually stuck out to me too, because I do worry about the requirement. It's not may or might, it's shall. And I do worry about how it will impact what we do. And along the lines of what Chair Waters said, if this will pass, could it be, and maybe this is a question for Corp Council, but could it be contested in court because it'll conflict with the state water code as well as Chapter 343 in the HRS?
I'm not too familiar with the water code. So I think that what it says in the bill, there are some shalls that are like the general shalls, and then it's kind of subject to those other requirements for infrastructure and the county's ability to enforce the LUO. And from what I understand, the more specific will overrule the more general. I think it would be illogical to say that we don't have the infrastructure for it, but you're still allowed to build those units without the sufficient infrastructure. So how can we enforce that provision, or how can they enforce a provision that we must allow those units if there isn't that infrastructure? So I know the wording can be a lot better, but for my intents and purposes of interpreting what is brought to us, we would enforce the LUO and we would require that necessary infrastructure or sufficient infrastructure is there in order to move forward to build additional units.
And we've had hearings here, I think in transportation, talking about parking. I mean, that's not even dealing with, like was mentioned earlier, the sewer, the water, the schools, the public safety facilities that are going to be needed. But you're saying that your department would be able to mandate that the infrastructure, I mean, this will affect, in the densely populated areas, we've had, again, heated discussions about parking. So how does that impact these infrastructure needs or possible infrastructure needs?
Right, so water, sewer, if there's not sufficient, then we wouldn't allow these additional units. As far as parking, and those are actually requirements through the LUO, again, that we could enforce. And on top of that, we can rule make and say what else is considered infrastructure for the purposes of this bill, and make sure that if this project doesn't have all these different infrastructure, then it can't move forward.
Okay. And this is probably more discussion than a question to you, but I'm going to put it out there. And if Corp Council or someone else wants to respond, I know, Councilmember Say always brings the fair point up that when things are put upon the city by the state, usually we're the ones who are then required to enforce it and then fund it. So would this bill be another unfunded mandate imposed by the state legislature and then passed on to us, where we have to then figure it out? So the taxpayers of our city and county are the ones. I saw the testimonies from other counties that were in support of it, but we know that our county is unique. It's different from other counties. So I do have questions about when we're saying we're going to do a statewide piece of legislation that will impact the counties, and it worked in one county, but it may not work in others. So is this something that we then have to worry about? We're going to our taxpayers have to then take on the burden?
As far as like funding, I think there could be an impact with more requests to develop under this bill. So that could be a resource issue for our staff. But then the big question is always infrastructure. So I do agree that the state could help us with building and creating more infrastructure so that we can have more units built. So it's not, I don't think it's directly within the bill, but that's something that should be considered, and that's how the state can really help us to create more units.
And in your department, we've worked with you for a while, and Chair Kiaina has been really gracious in allowing you to share the progress that you've made. Last week in the mayor's state of the city, he gave pretty specific measurables that he said you will meet. Do you anticipate this impacting that? Because now we're talking about more things that your department will then have to look at, and we're still dealing with a lag from prior permit applications?
You know, I think that with our ability to enforce how we're enforcing under the LUO, building code, et cetera, infrastructure subdivision, I don't think it'll have a major impact. But I think what we're doing, you know, all the improvements we're doing will help to generate more housing in a proper way. Yeah.
And I agree, and I think across the board, as was mentioned by a previous testifier, I think our goal is the same, but I do worry that this will negatively impact the department that you're right now running, and I feel like this is not going to be a way to help you meet the goals, that we're going to now slam you with more work, and so, which will require probably more staffing, which is more funding, and you know, it kind of turns into this cycle of are we addressing the issue, or are we just adding more problems to it?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Okimoto. I actually share your concerns. I wanted to acknowledge Councilmember Dos Santos Tam, and I actually wanted to bring Cora up to follow up on some infrastructure questions, because I do know that both Chair Waters and Councilmember Okimoto have raised it, and it's a very important point. So the state appears to allow DPP discretion to reject a permit application for additional dwelling units on residentially zoned lots if it is determined that there is insufficient infrastructure. Current zoning and related development capacity informs our sewer, water, and other infrastructure plans. If the bill passes, development capacity could substantially increase. How does that change how the city analyzes whether there is insufficient infrastructure?
So if I understand the question correctly, it's how do we plan for additional infrastructure that will go to areas with increased development density? Is that correct?
Yes, if development capacity, if the bill passes, development capacity would substantially increase, right? So how does that change how the city would be looking at what do you determine is insufficient infrastructure?
Okay, I think there are two parts to that answer. So one of them is certain city departments have long-range infrastructure plans. For example, Board of Water and I think Environmental Services has long-range sewer plans. So there are existing plans, and I suppose the city would have to reconsider the planned allocation of infrastructure through those processes and potentially have to provide more service to certain areas. I think DPP also has the ability through rulemaking to define what infrastructure is and what levels of consistency you need to enable further development. So I assume that that would be done in consultation with the other departments, water and sewer, for example. And then there are questions about the extent to which we can define infrastructure, because we do have to be consistent with state law, and without absolute clarity on the limits of what infrastructure consists of, you know, we'd have to think about things like whether or not we can fairly include resources like first responders and other public services. You know, the other view might be that if you require more services from first responders, then you just have to provide it if things are built out. So there are different ways of looking at it, and I think it's going to be a restarting of the planning process to figure those things out.
So first things first, you would have to, define what the term infrastructure means, and it could be very broad, correct?
That's correct. Some things I think are traditionally accepted as infrastructure: sewer, water, power. I don't think there's a fair dispute about whether or not those things are, necessary background requirements for development. Other things further afield, like parks and first responders, are less clearly within that sphere. So I think there's some interpretation that has to be made.
Do you think the bill clearly authorizes DPP discretion to reject approval for additional dwelling units due to lack of infrastructure?
So there are a couple of things. I think the Senate bill, there are a couple layers to that question. So I think the bill tends to treat subdivision differently from building construction. And so the bill has a enumerated list of things that pertain to subdivision. I think it's fairly disputable whether or not DPP's subdivision approval authority is limited to the items on that list or if it can impose additional requirements. That could go either way. But in terms of the building approval phase, where you're actually approving structures on approved lots, I think the Senate bill more clearly allows DPP to address infrastructure shortfalls. And then again, there's a question about what is the legitimate scope of infrastructure. And the bill also appears to distinguish between quote unquote land use regulations or requirements and infrastructure. And there may be some overlap between those two concepts, so there is some potential ambiguity there.
Can the city reject additional dwelling units if there is insufficient on-street parking or space for off-street parking?
In my opinion, that's not clear because it would depend on what is the definition of infrastructure and, does the purpose of a road include the need to provide off-street parking? Are you purely looking at, vehicular circulation and transportation?
Thank you. Members, Councilmember Wire, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a couple, and I'll be quick. Thank you, Chair. And this was still going to be for Corporation Council. I just wanted to clarify one thing that I thought I heard earlier, because it sounded like you had mentioned potential ambiguity between maybe the zoning versus the use and understanding what residential. Was that something you mentioned earlier, or?
So to clarify, my comment was that there appears to be different treatment between land use requirements, which I understand to be zoning requirements, and infrastructure requirements. So I think we have more ability to regulate development for infrastructure needs and less ability to impose zoning type regulations, under certain versions of the bill.
Okay, so and just to kind of follow up on that, so your reading of the bill, it would only apply to residential zoned lots?
We had talked about that earlier, and my comment was that the apparent intent of the bill is to specifically address lots that are currently both urban state zone and city residential zone. But there is a possibility that the bill could be read more expansively to cover other zones that provide for residential use.
Okay. When you say intent, that's based off of conversations you've heard or had or just seen in the hearings?
That's what I infer from a facial reading of the bill.
Okay. That's good to know. And I know earlier, like feasibility came up and all these other questions came up about, I guess, what the goals are with the particular bill. But of course, when we're looking at what it allows in totality, like that's what becomes the actual law, right? And so that's what folks would be able to do. I think it may be helpful if you could you just walk through briefly like what this bill would allow that folks can't already do under our zoning laws, or maybe how it's a little different. And I'll defer if DPP wants to take over from here, but understanding, when folks can have ADUs versus what this is expanding it to and how that's a little bit different.
I guess I'll just provide a kind of short basic answer, and I'll let DPP come in because they're really the experts on this. But in my opinion, the most status quo changing aspects of the bill are, for one, the minimum lot sizes. So you're talking about 2,000 square foot lots, and then you're talking about the ability, depending on which version of the bill you're looking at, to develop 3 to 4 units per lot. We are allowed to impose certain development requirements, like one off-street parking under certain versions. So you're looking at a different density of development, right? Instead of one home on an R20 lot, you're looking at 30 to 40 units, which is more units. From a regulatory perspective, in terms of what are the land use entitlements, That's probably what's on paper. In terms of the actual implementation of the bill, whether or not they can go forward, that's fact and circumstance specific. But if you imagine a street of R20 lots and all of them being converted to 30 or 40 units, I'd have questions about whether existing sewer mains, water mains are sufficient to actually enable that development capacity. I think there might be questions about what happens to a 2,000 square foot lot that cannot be serviced by sewer and water. And I think there are potential changes in terms of the types of structures that are built on these lots. If you're looking at a R5 lot or even just an R20 lot, you're probably looking at a structure that is several bedrooms, suitable for a larger family. If you're looking at a 2,000 square foot lot, then unless you're going two-story, it might be a studio type or one bedroom type unit, which might be suitable for singles, maybe even couples, but possibly not larger families.
Mahalo for that. And then I'll defer to Director Puna if she has anything that she'd like to add, or if you just wanted to impart any thoughts from DPP.
I mean, we can answer questions specific about like our current, what is allowed versus what we think they could be further.
Maybe just generally though, like if you had to explain it to like just folks watching, because it's been, and this will be my last question, Chair, but I think that the conversation, I mean, it's sad. Sad to hear, if there's been a breakdown in communication or folks are unwilling to talk or look at amendments. I haven't been a part of any conversations like that, but it's like my hope would be that ultimately both sides of the street over here can collaborate on questions. And so I know a lot of it's been framed as not necessarily the standalone solution to our housing crisis, but providing a pathway. And so if you could just if you wanted the community to have a takeaway about what this is trying to achieve, because I know we've heard a lot about the limitations. So just so we can have an honest conversation, if that makes sense.
So I think what the bill is, it is trying to allow more density, allow more units on residential lots. And like I said, through the process, the legislative process, we have just been trying to make sure that that is not just that there's no guardrails and that the county doesn't have any part in that. So we're fighting to make sure that we continue to have those powers. But I think it's a good discussion that, how do we maximize density on a lot with still being mindful of infrastructure and our neighborhoods and how we do that smartly. And of course, as you know, like we value and we know our processes from general plan all the way through are very important and valuable. So I think that's what we're fighting for. But I think the state or the legislature just wants to see it done quickly and, maybe at a different pace and in a different way. But I think you're exactly right. We're trying to work together to find that middle ground that makes sense for everyone.
Would it be fair to describe it as we currently allow various forms of density, right, depending on the lot, right? So residential and the ADU process versus you're maybe doing stuff in the TOD area. Height density is going to look very different. And the legislature is maybe seeking to expand or just increase the amount of density, but it's not like we never allow a little bit more, right, on residential?
Yeah, exactly. I think they're looking at residential to be the area, our residentially zoned districts that there's more space maybe for that. But even us, as we said, we're through our plans, we want to look at what areas we can create density and height. And then even in the apartment districts, there's opportunity there too. It's just maybe at what pace and how we phase that in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because I know so much of the conversation has been looking at just accessible infrastructure, particularly regarding transportation, and just maximizing development opportunities along the TOD. And we've spent so much taxpayer money on the rail. It's still going. I know a lot of folks are at times frustrated with the management, but I think the new director has gotten it back on track, and we're making progress. And the whole goal is to facilitate growth in particular areas to make it both easier for our community, more sustainable, more affordable. And so I do kind of find it odd that we're just looking at such broad expansion of density in residential without contemplation of parking, transportation access, or restrictions or safeguards to simply allow this to facilitate, the transition of land into different hands and divesting local families of, their opportunities there.
Right. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot going on the mainland too, where they're trying to be very aggressive or creative about housing also. Councilmember Say brought up a good point. There's just many ways of doing this, and the agricultural lands under the important ag lands process, like we've been pursuing that because we know that a lot of the ag land that we have on the island, it's not made for ag, and we need to go through that process so we can kind of filter out what land is for ag and what can be used for other uses, which could be housing. I mean, there's a lot. Our ag, the acreage is quite a lot. So that's another way that we can look at it, and we can figure out how do we get more land or be able to provide more housing on this island.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Chair. Mahalo.
Thank you. We're going to go to Councilmember Dos Santos Tam, followed by Chair Waters, and then Councilmember Okimoto.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me participate. Director, I wanted to thank you actually for alluding to the potential of increasing density in our apartment zones. I mean, I think it's pretty abundantly clear based on the line of questioning here that there's serious concerns about the impacts this would have in our R residential zones. So I wanted to ask, to what extent the department's evaluated the possibility of increasing density here, even if it's in the preliminary stages, and maybe if you have some just preliminary ideas or recommendations for what an appropriate FAR level or other kind of development standards would be in our apartment zones.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I think we've definitely been thinking about how we can maximize in these other more dense districts, whether it's an apartment or other, before we move into the residential areas. As far as like FAR, I mean, I think we're still kind of looking at that, and we definitely appreciate working with you and some of the ideas you have for your district. But we think that that's a really good next step. Look at apartment districts and densify there. Yeah.
Thank you. And the definition of a monster home came up earlier. It's 0.7 FAR is kind of the gold standard after we passed some of the legislation in 2016, 2017. I'll note that for our A1 zones, you can't even get to 0.7 on an A1 zone right now under the current FAR. It takes, I think, it takes 20,000 square feet of apartment zone to get to that same density that you put or prohibit a monster home on a residential area. So I think, these are definitely backwards, and I really look forward to amending this. So to that point, I wanted to ask, what's the process? If you could walk us through the process by which we might start looking at increasing density in apartment zones in a reasonable way.
So I think just in general, through the Bill 64, the LUO amendment, we can start looking at that. I think we already are in other areas, whether it's allowing residential in the business areas. So I think that is one way. And then working with our planners, they're always open to discussion, and we can talk about what the proposals are and kind of mold it into something that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
But just logistically, I think if it's council initiated, we have to propose legislation. It goes to you guys. There's a report. Could you walk us through the mechanical steps of that?
Yeah, it would go to us, and then we would take it to the Planning Commission because it's under the LUO, and then from there it would come to the council for approval.
And that's potentially a 2-year process if we take all 270 days for review and the Planning Commission takes a certain amount of time.
I think it could be shorter depending. Yeah.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make is this legislation And I don't doubt the sincerity of the introducers of this on the state side, but I think what they're proposing for us to do is really to accelerate the process of amending our rules way above and beyond what the natural process is here to give public input and all of that. And that's something that I think we should all consider. I'm glad you also mentioned, something that Committee Chair Kiana is bringing up, which is a discussion about, residential in certain business areas. We see that in Chinatown and some other places. Could you just recap for us a few of those ideas besides the FAR and apartment zones? What else has kind of been talked about?
So I think in Bill 64 currently, or we're looking at allowing residential in the BMX, B1 and B2 districts, the business, on the above the first floor where there would be commercial, et cetera. So I think that's important. I think that would help more of the mixed use development.
Okay, thank you. I know earlier we heard from a number of kind of YIMBY groups, the Zoning Atlas and Hawaii YIMBY. I think because of the serious concerns that we're hearing here, I would welcome ideas from them that aren't simply these bills on the state legislature side, so we can kind of have a conversation about what's more appropriate, especially in our really urban districts like mine and Speaker Say's districts. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Waters.
Thank you, Director. Hey, I got to come back to the plans that your department has promulgated. Do these plans give you sufficient cover to deny one of the applications for a subdivision? Right, if it doesn't comport with one of these plans?
So the planning documents are guidance.
Right.
And we could use that as to guide part of our decision, but it certainly isn't an actual, requirement like under ordinance or statute.
Right. I mean, you can see how certain communities would be upset that they've gone through all this trouble and expense to create these plans, pursuant to state law, by the way, right? And then DPP doesn't follow them. Can you see how that could create a problem?
Yes.
But are you willing to say that you're going to follow these plans and enforce them when looking at applications if this bill passes?
So absolutely, I think we're driven by our plans. For someone to come in and ask for a building permit based on this bill, again, I think we would look at our ordinance, our LUO, and our subdivision, et cetera, to guide whether that would be allowed. But it starts from the plans that help to create our zoning, and I think all the other considerations for subdivision, et cetera, they all flow together. So yeah, I think to some extent we are considering what it is being said and stated in our plans when we, all the way at the tail end, we permit a building permit for something like this.
I think it is very basic form. The general plan is saying, hey, look, we're going to guide growth on our island because of the infrastructure, as an example, right? The roads are available within the primary urban core, within the EVA district, that may not be available in other neighborhoods, right? So again, in a sense, that gives you guidance. And if so, if this is determined to be prescriptive, right, we have to do it. And by the way, it's super unclear, right, based on all the testimony that we've heard today and my own reading of this and talking to lawyers about this, that it's not clear whether or not it's prescriptive or not, right? Do we have to do it? Because, so, but you're reading it as it's not prescriptive. We don't have to do this.
I'm interpreting it that the city still, the DPP still has the authority to enforce its land use ordinance and its subdivision and other. And we have the ability to create rules that would even further kind of define what would be required for this type of development.
I mean, the bill sort of dances around that, but do you think you can come up with language that we can suggest to the legislature to make that absolutely clear?
Yeah, I think that the language can definitely be stronger or more clear about that authority that the county should continue to have.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask Corp Counsel again another question? Thank you, Director. And I'm looking on page 1, we're talking about the additional dwelling units. It says, notwithstanding any law, ordinance, code, or standard to the contrary, a residentially zoned lot within an urban district established by Chapter 205 shall be allowed additional residential units. So just looking at that, notwithstanding any law, ordinance, code, or standard to the contrary. But doesn't our ordinance, isn't it already contrary to this? We established 3.5, 5, 10, and 20 square feet. So isn't that, it's already, this bill is contrary to ordinance.
So I wouldn't want to provide too much of a detailed legal analysis on the record or outside of an executive session.
Sure.
But I guess what I can just kind of say as a matter of fact is that there are clauses in the bill that you appear to be aware of, including a purpose section that says the purpose of this bill is to prohibit the counties from allowing less than X units per lot. And so those types of that language, could support a reasonable argument that our ability to reject some of these developments is more constrained. I'm sure there are other parts of the bill that specifically address ability to approve or deny based on certain subdivision requirements and when certain zoning requirements can be imposed. So perhaps suffice it to say that it's unclear to me and less than certain that we can reject development that we might find inappropriate.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, one last question, or I can come back second round if you want.
No, why don't you continue?
Well, thank you. I actually have one more question for DPP. Thank you, Cor. So the backlog of building permits at DPP is no secret. While you have made many strides in this area, what impact do you believe the passage of this measure would have on your workload and backlog? And I guess basically what I'm getting at is, if we get a flood of people who wanted to subdivide, how is that going to help, reduce your backlog?
So if we get a lot of applications to subdivide, that would be with our subdivision branch, separate from our building permit branch that has the backlog. But at the same time, we are under-resourced in the subdivision branch. So it would definitely impact that branch.
I agree with what you said earlier, that the ledge wants to hurry up the process, right? And it's pretty evident in the referrals, committee referrals. But, I just want to point out some of the things that you and the city and this body, the council, are doing to actually try to solve this affordable housing process or problem. We already allow ADUs, right? An accessory dwelling unit.
Okay.
But are you looking at possibly allowing a second ADU?
So I think through the Bill 64, we are looking at potentially a second ADU.
Okay, and perhaps we can put more resources to, within your department, quicken the permitting process for these ADUs, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Okimoro.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question for Corp Counsel. Aloha, I was wondering if you could tell me how this, if this measure passes, how this will impact planned communities like my own district, because they have DCCR's covenants and rules. How would this impact these planned communities?
My understanding is that the bill has a prescription against future restrictive covenants that would create certain limitations, but it doesn't appear to affect existing restrictive covenants, so it doesn't divest those property rights. So to the extent that things are already in place, I think the status quo is maintained, but in terms of communities that will be planned in the future, there might be additional restrictions on the type of restrictive covenants that could be placed on the properties.
And that's stated in the measure, just so I'm sure, just so I'm clear, it's stated that anything that was already created there, they can't be mandated or shall require these units to be built.
To be honest, I don't recall specifically whether or not there is a anti-retroactive clause at the end of the bill, but the text of the bill that speaks about the covenants is forward-looking. So based on that, I think that it's only a forward-looking restriction on those covenants.
But based on what you just said, it's not specifically clear. So there could be a loophole where
it's possible. I think what I'm saying most of all is just that I just don't remember if there is a clause that clearly states nothing is retroactive, but because the language appears to be forward-looking, I don't think it should be applied in a retroactive way, irrespective of whether or not there's that standard clause at the end of the bill.
And so if something happened, a community like the district that I represent, would you're saying that it wouldn't be mandated based on your assumption?
I'm saying that there shouldn't be an impact to existing covenants, but there is a restriction on future covenants.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about number of additional units, DPP and core, but let me start with DPP. How many residential units are allowed in our residential districts?
Let's see. So for R20, I'm sorry, how many units?
How many residential units are allowed in our residential districts in the various Rs?
So maybe I should have Liz Krieger come up and speak about the exact numbers.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. I'm Elizabeth Krieger, the Division Chief for the Land Use Permits Division. On a basic level, the minimum lot sizes for each residential district are corresponding with the number of the district. So in the R3.5 residential district, 1 dwelling unit is allowed for a 3,500 square foot lot. In R5, 1 dwelling unit is allowed for a 5,000 square foot lot. 7.5 is 7,500 square feet, one unit. R10 is 10,000 square feet for 1 unit, and R20 is 20,000 square feet per 1 unit. And then each of those could have 1 ADU, or they could have 1 Ohana dwelling unit, depending on a couple of other caveats.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And of course, in Bill 64, 2023, we are looking to increase that number, correct? Or considering the ADU?
For purposes of the ADU?
Yes.
That's right.
Okay. Yes. So another question is, with regard to SB 3202 SD2, how many additional units would be required to be allowed on properties in our residential districts?
In my reading of the bill, it looks to me like for every primary dwelling unit that would be allowed, 2 additional units would be allowed.
So give me a hypothetical for 20,000 square feet.
So on an R20, or you're talking about R20, 20,000 square feet, right now you could have one dwelling and one ADU. And my reading of the Senate bill is that you would be allowed to have one dwelling and 2 additional dwelling units. But the bill also appears to allow somebody with a 20,000 square foot R20 lot to request a subdivision for a minimum lot size of 2,000 square feet, which would allow the R10 lot, R20, 20,000 square foot lot to be subdivided into 10 zoning lots, which would allow 3 units per lot, being 30 units.
So that would be 30 dwelling units would be allowed under the state bill on a 20,000 square foot lot, correct?
That's how I read it, yep.
Okay, thank you. If the bill increases the development of potential of, if the bill increases the development potential of parcels, how might that affect the property's value? Could this affect land prices across Oahu?
I'm not an economist, and I'm not a real estate specialist. However, if I owned a property and suddenly a lot more dwelling units could be built on that, I would want to sell it for more.
Does anything in the bill require new dwelling units to be affordable?
No.
Do we know how many more dwelling units cumulatively could be built if this bill passes? Because the intent states that it's trying to increase the number of affordable housing units.
Are you asking island-wide?
Yes.
In a recent analysis where we were looking at how many ADUs had been built, we found that there are something like 135,000 zoning lots that exceed 3,500 square feet on the island. So in theory, if each of those had 3 dwelling units on it, I suppose we'd be looking at, what is that, 345,000? What did I say was the original number? Anyway, lots. It would be a lot. But it is also worth saying that a lot of zoning lots today have various other plans that do allow a higher density of residential development. For example, there are cluster developments, there are planned development housing developments, there are 201Hs that have been approved all over the island.
How will infrastructure limitations affect how many dwelling units can be built?
Today, when an Ohana, I'm going to say an ADU comes in, they need to do an ADU pre-check, and that ADU pre-check requires them to go to various departments and areas of the city. So they need to get confirmation that there's water and sewer before we can process the building permit. So I believe that in the same way that if water and sewer availability wasn't there, then we couldn't approve building permits that would exceed that capacity without an update in those infrastructure requirements. That's how our current building permit processing works.
Thank you. And my last question actually has to do with accessory versus principal dwelling units. And I don't mind hearing both from CORE as well as DPP. Do we think the bill clearly distinguishes accessory dwelling units and primary dwelling units?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it clearly distinguishes the primary, like what would be a primary dwelling unit versus accessory dwelling units, and it doesn't speak to anything like previously they were talking about owner occupancy. There's no discussion of that, and there's also no discussion about CPRs, condominium property regimes, and whether those resultant lots from this bill would be allowed to be split for ownership purposes.
And I'm assuming that concerns you, and right? So can I also just confirm if CORE wants to clarify also if they have concerns regarding the lack of distinguishing between ADUs and primary dwelling units? I'm sorry, accessory dwellings and primary dwelling units.
With respect to the use of the word accessory in the bill, I think it is a misuse of the word, which is kind of a term of art within the land use regulation field. Because typically an accessory use is one that is subordinate to a principal use, which is generally a larger, more intensive use. And it's also, historically and customarily associated with that use. But the way the bill allocates development rights, it doesn't require a primary dwelling and two smaller accessory use dwellings. It just says you're entitled to X dwellings subject to the same development standards on one lot. And so I think it is a misuse of the term. I don't think the term is used to impose additional regulatory requirements, or I wouldn't read it that way because of what the rest of the bill says.
Thank you so much. Members, are there any other questions?
Chair.
Councilmember, Vice Chair Cordero.
I just have one last follow-up question. The same thing I posed to DPP, but for Deputy Corporation Counsel Saito. This is in relation to something I brought up to DPP, but also what Chair Waters brought up in his first line, in the beginning of his line of questioning about the counties having jurisdiction over the conducting of our zoning activities. So do you believe or feel like the bill infringes on county home rule?
There is a very complex legal analysis that I could provide in executive session. Just for the purposes of the record now, I suppose what I'd say is that the original Zoning Enabling Act and current text of both 46-4 speak to an initial intent to place the zoning powers within the counties, subject to certain state guidance, right? So there are state zoning districts, and there are guidelines for what can occur within different districts. The urban districts in particular were primarily committed to county authority. There have been a number of state measures that have passed that have put caveats on our power. In some cases, the counties are allowed to be more restrictive. In other cases, we are not. It's a case-by-case and very rigorous analysis. So to provide comment on this particular measure, more specific comment, at that point, I would suggest an executive session.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Chair Waters.
Thank you. Can I ask Liz a question? Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your testimony. That was very, very helpful. What's to stop someone who has a zone 20 square foot lot, right, R20, or an R10 for that matter, or R7.5 for that matter, subdividing it into R3.5s?
Today, the land use ordinance regulates the minimum lot size.
Right, but you can apply through DPP to subdivide it, your 20,000 square foot lot, right?
If your 20,000 square foot lot is in the R3.5, then you can apply to subdivide down to lots that are at least 3,500 square feet.
Okay, but you have to apply through DPP, wait in line like everybody else to get that subdivision, right?
That's right. And you have to provide survey maps that show how you're going to meet the subdivision standards in revised ordinances of Honolulu, Chapter 22.
Now, does this bill circumvent that process so that you no longer have to do that if you're going to subdivide to 2,000 square feet?
The bill says that the director can, I forget exactly what the words are. It's like the director shall evaluate, it shall review and act upon these subdivision applications. So I think that the big question is, in reviewing and acting upon, are they based on the subdivision standards that we have today? And if they are, then the action would be denial if they can't meet the minimum subdivision standards today.
Right. I think we've established that that whole part of the bill is not clear. But let's just put that aside for a minute. And I guess what I'm getting at is someone who owns a larger lot today could apply for a subdivision with DPP, wait in line, the same as if someone wanted to use this bill and eventual law. They still got to apply for the subdivision through DPP and wait for that, right?
That's right.
And then once you subdivide your 20,000 square foot lot, 10,000 square foot lot, or 7.5 down to 3.5, you then can apply to put ADUs on there, right? Just like as if what this bill is requiring, right?
That's right.
And we, DPP, working with the City Council, are currently looking at whether or not we should allow 2 ADUs on your lot, right?
Yes, I believe so.
So in a sense, I think it's logical and reasonable to say that maybe we don't even need this bill, right? Because what we're talking about is a 2,000 square foot minimum lot or a 3.5 square foot lot in Honolulu. I can't speak for the neighbor islands, right? That's really what it comes down to, 2,000 versus 3.5. Because especially if we pass Bill 64, you're going to be allowed to put 2 ADUs, right? I mean, I'm just trying to be reasonable and apply common sense. That's what it really comes down to. Or am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I think that what the city and county has been doing over the last 10 years especially, because the accessory dwelling units was originally a bill in 2014, so 10 years ago. We adopted the ADU bills. We adopted the affordable housing strategy, which is now Chapter 29. We adopted the apartment bill, which is now Chapter 32, which is commonly referred to as Bill 7, which allows a lot of affordable housing. We've had many, many more 201H applications in the last 6 or 7 years than we had in the decade or so before that. So we have been doing a lot to move the needle on housing. And then, of course, like we were talking about before, currently with Bill 64, we're looking at the use standards, which are found in Article 5. Another phase of the LUO update is looking at the development standards, which are found in Article 3. And in that phase, we will specifically be looking at density and lot sizes to determine, based on the regional plans and the general plan, what's the appropriate size for the zoning lots that we have now.
No, thank you so much for pointing that out, because the city is doing a lot working towards creating more affordable housing. I just want to point out that as far as the ADU ordinance is concerned, the City Council passed an ordinance requiring DPP to approve within 6 months, right? Automatic approval, we call it, right?
I don't process building permits, so I'm unaware of the specific timeline on that.
You know, the other thing that I'm sure you're aware of, because you diligently sit in these hearings that we have in the Housing and Zoning Committee, but, you know, we hear that HHFDC only approves 5 of these projects that come to us through LIHTC financing, when they actually have 25 that can't be approved because there really isn't the financing for it, right?
We certainly get a lot more development plans than there appears to be financing for from the affordable housing side of things for affordable housing developers.
So I think that's another spot that perhaps the City Council, working with the legislature, can try to resolve the financing aspect of building these affordable houses. Okay, thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. Members, if there are no further questions, I'm going to call for the vote. I would like to thank Council Chair Waters and Councilmember Vice Chair Cordero for their work on their proposed CD1s. The chair recommends that Resolution 24-65 be amended to my hand-carried CD1 identified as OCS 2024-0278 /3/20/2024 at 4:07 p.m., which incorporates Council Chair Waters' amendment in his CD1 and as further amended to incorporate the intent of Councilmember Cordero's hand-carried CD1, which opposes House Bill 1630 HD1 and Senate Bill 3202 SD2 as opposed to expressing strong concerns relating to those bills. Any objections, reservations? Hearing none, the resolution is amended to a CD1. The chair then recommends that Resolution 24-65 CD1 be reported out for adoption. Any objections, reservations? Hearing none, so ordered. Mahalo for the administration for being here to answer all of the questions, and mahalo everyone for your attendance and participation in today's meeting. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.